In this video, I'm going to show you how to create the West Coast style self-generating random pitched sound, something like the R2-D2 sound. Right now, I just have my MIDI in plugged in, so I can play on my keyboard. Let me increase the sustain. Now, generally for this sound, you would go for a pure sine wave, but since we don't have one, we can just work with the triangle. That's a pretty buzzy triangle. Anyway, so that's our sound source. Now we need the pitch of the sound to be randomly shifting. So we could use the random voltage output. The clock is very low right now, so I'll just tap here to get it running. So now we can use this slow moving stepped random voltage to control the pitch on the oscillator. Now I could plug this into the 1 volt per octave input, but the range is going to be a bit too extreme. Let's try it. So extremely high pitch frequencies we're getting. I could use a linear FM input, but this input is designed more for audio rate modulation. So it doesn't quite work here, and you can hear that step voltage is kind of getting smoothed out. So let's make use of the voltage mats. I'll plug it into this right input here. Now on the output, we have this attenuator to control the depth as well as phase. So let's take that output and plug that to the 1 volt per octave input. The range still seems a bit too much, so now with the attenuator, I can reduce that range. If you want a faster rate, just tap faster here. Now I don't want to have to always tap on program B to control the rate of that random voltage. So let's make use of the slope to trigger that on its own. I'll set it to a cycle. There's an end of cycle output here, which gives us an on-off style output based on the rise and fall values. So if I make those longer, we can see that end of cycle rate is slower. So let's use the end of cycle output to trigger the clock, which is going to be in the tempo input here. So now when I play a note, it's still pretty much the same sound, but I can change the rate of that random voltage with the rise and fall values. We can control the range of notes over here. Now technically, we don't have to use the end of cycle. We can use the actual slope output, and it's going to work the same. The tempo input is just going to ignore the slopiness of the input. It's just going to use the higher and lower value to set its rate. Now we talked about creating a self-generating patch, but I have to play a note to trigger this. So let's automate that process too. So we basically need the contour to be triggered on its own, so that in turn will trigger the dynamic section. So what we can do is, since we have the end of cycle output free, we can plug that to the gate on the contour. And there we go. So without playing a note, we're hearing the same sound. The slope is simultaneously triggering the contour as well as the clock. Or you can say controlling the rate of the clock. This curve control on the slope will make it go faster or slower. And of course we have the rise and fall control as well. Let's shape the contour, get rid of the sustain, so we get a more plucky sound with the onset completely down. Now this is starting to sound a bit like the R2-D2 patch. There's a curve control on the contour as well. Decay control. Now, what if we add some attack or onset? That sounds very cool. This attenuator can go into negative as well. So now we're creating really low random values on the pitch. The pitch control dial now works like an offset. So if I move that pitch control dial up and the attenuator is in the negative, the range of modulation has been inverted. Now of course we don't have to use the pure triangle sound. We can switch over to the overtone section, and now we can play with the multiply or the overtones itself to create a more rich tone. With this attenuator here, I can make the slope modulate the multiply as well. And now we're getting a really wacky sound. I guess this is your typical West Coast style non-diatonic atonal self-generating patch. I call this a bleeps and bloops patch. Let's try this with the square shape instead of the triangle. So I'll plug the square out to this input here, so a much richer tone. I'll set the contour onset back to the lowest so we get a nice plucky tone. Sounds pretty cool in the lower register, like some kind of a random pitch bass generator. So there you go, a self-generating patch that's running on its own without having to play in any MIDI notes. Stay tuned for more.